In the 1950s, the jet age was just beginning to take shape. Commercial aviation had entered uncharted territory, and for the first time, airliners were no longer bound by propellers and piston engines. The future looked limitless, but it was also uncertain. Should airlines invest in speed, chasing the dream of near supersonic travel? Or should they focus on range and efficiency, carrying more passengers farther than ever before? Some manufacturers argued for luxury and prestige, while others believed that utility and profitability would ultimately decide the winners. Nowhere was this divide more visible than in two aircraft introduced at the turn of the new decade, Boeing's 720 and Convair's 880. They represented two ends of the spectrum. One built to be practical, efficient, and profitable, the other built to be the fastest airliner in the sky. It was a rivalry that promised to reshape aviation, but in the end, only one philosophy would prevail.
In October of 1958, Pan American World Airways introduced the Boeing 707 on its New York-Paris route. Within months, the public perception of air travel changed completely. Juan Trippe, Pan Am's charismatic and risk-taking CEO, had gambled on the 707 by ordering 20 aircraft in 1955, at the time the largest order for jetliners in history. That single decision didn't just make Boeing 707 a success, it made it the global standard for intercontinental travel. By 1959, airlines from Air France to American Airlines were rushing to secure delivery slots for the 707 or Douglas's rival, the DC-8. Jets meant speed, prestige, and above all, market share. A carrier without them risked irrelevance. But there was a problem emerging in the numbers. Both the 707 and the DC-8 were long-haul giants, carrying 150 to 180 passengers and requiring long, reinforced runways. They were perfect for international routes, but far less efficient on domestic sectors like Chicago to New York or Los Angeles to Dallas. Airlines quickly began asking, what about a smaller medium-range jet that could operate profitably out of shorter runways while still offering passengers the allure of jet travel? Convair saw the opening. The company was already a household name in military aviation. As a division of General Dynamics, Convair had delivered the massive B-36 Peacemaker in the late 1940s, a six-engine strategic bomber with intercontinental range. And in 1956, they had shocked the world with the B-58 Hustler, the first supersonic bomber capable of sustained Mach 2 flight. Convair's engineers believed they could translate their military innovations into the civil sector. And internally, the company's leadership pushed the narrative that if they didn't enter the jetliner race now, they would never have another chance. The market forecasts looked tempting. The Civil Aeronautics Board and industry analysts in 1957 estimated that U.S. carriers alone would need at least 300 medium-range jetliners by the mid-1960s. International carriers like Lufthansa and Swissair were also eyeing smaller jets for European networks. Convair's executives pitched the idea that by positioning themselves as the premium alternative to Boeing, they could win 30 to 40% of this emerging niche. Convair's design team began sketching what would become the Model 22, later designated the Convair 880. From the beginning, they decided the aircraft would differentiate itself with speed. The name itself was a marketing statement. 880 for its intended cruising speed of 880 feet per second, roughly Mach 0.88, far faster than the Boeing 707 or DC-8, which cruised closer to Mach 0.82. In the words of one Convair executive in 1957, "We will give the airlines a horse race, not a mule." But Boeing had already anticipated this market shift. Even as it delivered the first 707s to Pan Am, United Airlines, and TWA, Boeing's engineers in Seattle were working on a derivative, a shortened, lighter, and more economical version of the 707. This new jet, which would become the Boeing 720, was announced in May 1957, a full 2 years before Convair's 880 first flew. Boeing's pitch was simple. Same cockpit as the 707, same Pratt & Whitney JT3C engines, same maintenance ecosystem, but with the ability to operate from shorter runways and at lower operating costs. The two philosophies couldn't have been more different. Convair wanted glamour and prestige, selling speed as the decisive factor. Boeing wanted continuity and efficiency, betting airlines would prefer a jet that pilots and mechanics already knew. And as the 1960s dawned, the stage was set for a showdown. One company chasing image, the other quietly locking down the market. Convair thought speed would win the race. Boeing had a very different idea. By the late 1950s, the two challengers entered the ring almost side by side. But their approaches couldn't have been further apart. Convair unveiled the 880 in January 1959, positioning it as the fastest subsonic airliner ever built. Its very name was a statement of intent: 880 feet per second, or Mach 0.88. It was powered by four General Electric CJ8053 turbojets, a civilian derivative of the J-79, the same engine propelling the B-58 Hustler bomber and F-104 Starfighter to supersonic speeds. With 11,200 pounds of thrust each, the CJ-805s gave the 880 blistering acceleration and cruising speeds near 610 miles per hour. But they also came with drawbacks: noisy operation, high fuel consumption, and maintenance demands unfamiliar to airlines accustomed to Pratt & Whitney engines. The airframe reflected Convair's obsession with speed. Its fuselage was only 132 inches wide, just enough for 5 abreast seating in coach or 4 abreast in luxury layouts, with total capacity between 88 and 110 passengers depending on configuration. The wing was slender and optimized for high-speed cruise, with a 35-degree sweep and a comparatively small surface area, which reduced drag but made takeoffs and landings less forgiving. Convair's executives openly pitched the jet as a businessman's special, a prestige aircraft that would get fewer passengers across the country faster, with an emphasis on exclusivity. Internally, Convair speculated that airlines would market time savings as a premium product, justifying higher ticket prices. Boeing, meanwhile, rolled out the 720 in November 1959, entering service with United Airlines in July 1960. Rather than build an all-new jet, Boeing simply shortened the 707 by 8 feet, re-engineered its wing with a modest leading-edge modification, and lightened the airframe by nearly 20,000 pounds. This gave it improved performance from shorter runways, a crucial selling point for secondary airports. The 720 was initially powered by the Pratt & Whitney JT3C turbojet, rated at 12,000 pounds of thrust, later upgraded to the more efficient JT3D turbofan. Where Convair limited itself to 110 passengers, the Boeing 720 could seat between 100 and 149 depending on layout, making it far more versatile for airlines balancing high and low-density routes. The cabin cross-section was identical to the 707, 6 abreast seating, wide aisles, and common galleys. For airlines already flying the 707, the advantages were immediate. Pilots required minimal transition training, spare parts were interchangeable, and maintenance crews were already familiar with the systems. The philosophies were polar opposites. Convair was betting on prestige, speed, and exclusivity. An airline could sell fewer seats at a higher price, positioning the 880 as a jet for executives and first-class travelers. Boeing gambled on pragmatism, designing the 720 as a workhorse that could blend seamlessly into an airline's fleet, lowering overall costs while still delivering the jet-age glamour passengers demanded. The numbers told the story of the gamble. The Convair 880 had a maximum takeoff weight of about 184,500 pounds, while the 720 came in lighter at around 206,000 pounds, but carried more passengers. On fuel burn, the Convair 880 consumed nearly 1,100 gallons per hour at cruise, compared to the 720's 950 to 1,000. In a world where jet fuel was cheap in 1960, Convair believed this difference would be acceptable. Boeing suspected otherwise, anticipating rising operating costs would punish the more extravagant design. Convair's goal was to build no more than 200 units, but capture the premium carriers,
TWA, Delta, Swissair, Japan Airlines, perhaps even Pan Am, and used the 880 as a halo product to secure future sales of the Convair 990. Boeing's target was much more straightforward: extend its dominance by offering airlines a low-risk entry into jets, leveraging the already strong momentum of the 707 program. Two very different jets, two very different philosophies, and only one would prove right. But the real test wasn't in the brochures, it was in the fight for airline contracts. When the Convair 880 entered service in May 1960 with Delta Airlines, Delta ordered 17 of the jets and marketed them as the fastest way to cross the United States, trimming schedules by as much as 20 minutes compared to a Boeing. Within months, Trans World Airlines, then under the personal grip of Howard Hughes, followed suit, ordering 29 examples. Hughes was infatuated with speed. He told his board that passengers would pay more to fly the fastest thing in the sky, even though TWA's finances were already strained under his erratic management. Other carriers were drawn in too. Swissair signed on for 10, Japan Airlines for 5, Cathay Pacific for 2. In total, Convair managed to secure about 65 orders worldwide, a respectable number for a newcomer, but far below what the company needed to recoup its investment. Boeing 720, by contrast, spread like wildfire. United Airlines, the launch customer, ordered 29 and immediately deployed them on medium-range routes where the full 707 was too much airplane. American Airlines followed with 30, Eastern Airlines with 23, Lufthansa with 4, and many others trickled in. By the end of 1962, Boeing had delivered over 100 units, almost double Convair's total sales, and it wasn't by accident. Airline executives quickly noticed a pattern. The Convair 880, while praised for its smooth ride and quiet cabin thanks to its GE engines, seated fewer passengers, usually 88 to 100 in typical layouts, compared to the 720's 120 to 140. That difference meant thousands of dollars in revenue lost per flight, no matter how much faster the Convair flew. Passengers who flew both aircraft often preferred the Convair. Reports from Delta in 1961 noted that travelers described it as roomier per seat and quieter than the 707. But economics told a harsher story. A flight attendant from TWA later recalled that while first-class passengers loved the exclusivity, the empty seats in the back were impossible to ignore. Meanwhile, Boeing played a smarter game behind the curtain. Airlines flying the 707 needed no new simulators or separate crews to operate the 720. Maintenance crews could swap parts between models, keeping costs down. Even pilots appreciated the minimal retraining. Convair, on the other hand, required airlines to invest in unique training pipelines, spare parts, and maintenance procedures for a fleet that was far smaller worldwide. The choice for many airlines became obvious. The Convair 880 appealed to prestige, but Boeing 720 fit seamlessly into networks already built around the 707. Howard Hughes's push kept TWA in the Convair camp for a while, but even his influence couldn't make the 880 competitive against Boeing's scale. By 1962, the optimism surrounding the Convair 880 was gone. Airlines had the numbers, and they weren't pretty. The jet's hourly fuel burn came in well above the Boeing 720's, and with oil prices rising, the penalty cut straight into profits. The smaller cabin didn't help either. With most layouts topping out near 100 seats, the 880 simply couldn't match the revenue potential of a 720 configured for 130 or more passengers. And then there was support. Convair's decision to use unique General Electric CJ805 engines meant airlines had to maintain separate inventories and training programs for a tiny subfleet. Boeing 720, by contrast, slotted neatly into the 707 ecosystem. Pratt & Whitney JT3C power plants, similar cockpits, common spares. The 720 didn't just cost less to fly, it was cheaper to keep flying. Convair had spent over $425 million developing the program, equivalent to billions today, and sales simply couldn't cover it. For General Dynamics, every delivery deepened the loss. But instead of cutting their losses, Convair doubled down.
In 1961, Convair rolled out the 990 Coronado, a stretched, more powerful follow-up to the 880. Fitted with CJ805-23 engines and distinctive anti-shock bodies on the wings, it set out to cruise faster than anything else in the sky, close to Mach 0.91. Capacity grew to just over 120 passengers, but it still lagged behind rivals. Worse, fuel burn climbed even higher. Airlines, already turning toward cost per seat mile as their guiding metric, had little interest in shaving a few minutes off block times if it meant higher operating costs. Orders trickled in, Swissair, American Airlines, and a few others, but most carriers passed. Only 37 were ever built, and by 1965, the line was shut down. With that, General Dynamics exited the civil airliner business entirely. Though a financial disaster, the Convair 880 carved out a curious afterlife. It remained the fastest subsonic jetliner ever put into service, a point of pride for pilots who loved its responsiveness. A few lived on in charter fleets, VIP service, and even in pop culture. Elvis Presley's Lisa Marie, perhaps the most famous of all, kept the type in the public eye long after airlines retired theirs. But the numbers were undeniable. Just 65 Convair 880s and 37 Coronados left the factory. Boeing 720 sold more than 150, and both were dwarfed by the thousands of 707s and DC-8s that filled airline schedules through the 1970s. By the mid-1970s, both the Convair 880 and Boeing 720 had faded from frontline passenger service. Neither defined the era like the 707, but their competition marked a turning point. Boeing's strategy of incremental design, lowering risk, maximizing commonality, leveraging scale, proved stronger than Convair's bold pursuit of speed and exclusivity. For later builders like Airbus, McDonnell Douglas, and Boeing itself, the lesson was clear. Airlines valued economics, reliability, and support networks far more than raw performance. Still, at the dawn of the 1960s, the Convair 880 looked like the future. On the ramp in Miami, its promise of speed and prestige stood in contrast to the 720's practicality. History, however, sided with the aircraft that fit into airlines' balance sheets. So now the question is yours. Would you have chosen the Convair 880 for its speed and style, or the Boeing 720 for its efficiency and practicality? If you've flown on either or worked with them, share your experience in the comments. And if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe.